Hello there, everyone. My name's Andrew.
And I'm Kassy.
And this is the Culips English Podcast. Welcome back to Culips, everyone. This is Simplified Speech, the Culips series, which features clear, natural, and easy to understand conversations between native speakers. Helping me today with this episode is my co-host, Kassy. Hey, Kassy, how's it going?
Hey, Andrew. I'm doing well.
All right. Good to hear. Well, Kassy, in today's episode, we're going to talk about a topic that I think will be a little bit challenging for me and for you as well, because we're going to talk about being an only child. Of course, Kassy, you and I, we both have siblings. I have a brother and a sister. And if I recall correctly, you have a couple of sisters?
Yep, I have two sisters.
Two younger sisters?
Yes. One of them, though, she was an only child for her first 6 years. So maybe I can talk about her experience.
Okay, perfect. So if you're an only child, it means that you have no brothers and no sisters, right? You're a part of a family that just has one child, an only child in the family. But this topic is interesting nonetheless. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about it. I was actually trying to find somebody on Culips that, could bring the perspective of an only child to this kind of conversation, and I couldn't find anyone. So everybody has brothers or sisters on the Culips team. But it was suggested, this topic, it was suggested to us by Melissa, a user of our Discord server. And Melissa wrote a comment on our episode topic suggestion channel. And I'll just read the comment here. She wrote, "Have you ever recorded an episode about only children? The pros and cons, your personal opinion, depending on the country, your religion, etc. I think there could be a lot to discuss." So we'll get into that and we'll talk about those things that Melissa suggested here in today's episode.
But before we get started with today's conversation, I just want to let you guys know the best way to improve your English with Culips is by becoming a Culips member. Culips membership can help you reach your English goals and speed up your learning. As a Culips member, you will get exclusive access to interactive transcripts and study guides to deepen your understanding of every episode, monthly live streams with Andrew, Alina, and other members to practice your speaking English competently and to connect with the community, and extra bonus content and our member-only Fluency Files series to unlock your full potential. So, guys, what are you waiting for? Become a Culips member and start your journey to fluency. To become a member, simply visit culips.com or click the link in the description.
Now, at the start of each of our Simplified Speech episodes, we also like to give a shout out to one of our supporters and listeners. And today we are going to shout out Sohyun. Now, Sohyun left us a 5-star rating and a super amazing, fantastic, and I have to say, Kassy, very well-written review on Apple Podcasts. So let's take a look at it together and I will read it here for everyone. So Sohyun wrote, "I'm from Korea. I'm 12 years old. One day I was searching for English podcasts because I want to enhance my English fluency so much. And suddenly I felt a strong will to click Culips. At that moment, the connection with Culips started. Culips is perfect. Andrew's voice is perfect. All the stories are very interesting. Thank you, all of you that make Culips episodes. And also to Andrew and all the co-hosts that provide me with a lot of tools to study English happily. Thank you so much. It became my routine to listen to English podcasts every morning. I hope this review can help you even a little bit. Thank you. And I want to meet Andrew someday because we live in the same country. And please read this review as a shout out."
So cute. And 12 years old. Sohyun, you're very cool.
Very cool. What an awesome writer. And I mean, Sohyun, I don't think you really need Culips. Your English seems amazing already. And yeah, if you ever see me walking around, Sohyun, I'm not sure what area of Korea you're from, but if you see me walking around, please come and say hello. And yeah, it would be cool to meet you as well. And I'm happy we were able to give you a shout out on this episode. And Kassy, with that being said, why don't we get into it and get started by talking about our topic for today, which is only children. Now, it seems a little bit weird to talk about this topic in that way, right? We have to pluralize it by changing child to children. And it's kind of weird to pluralize because usually an only child is just one child in the family. So anyways, guys, please accept that there is a little weird grammar thing going on when we talk about this topic. But Kassy, why don't we start with your story? Because you said that you had a sister who was an only child until she was 6 years old. And then I guess another sister came along. What happened? What's the story there?
No, well, I guess technically I was an only child for the first 3.5 years of my life because I'm the oldest. But it's hard to remember too much of that time. However, my parents did get divorced when I was about 10 and my sister was 6. And then my mom remarried and my stepdad, he had a daughter who became my sister, but she was an only child for the first, 5.5, 6 years of her life before, she joined me and my sister.
So she was an only child, and then suddenly she had 2 older sisters.
Yeah, the crazy thing is her mom also remarried, and she had 2 stepbrother and sisters on that side, and her mom had 2 more children. So she went from being an only child to just like so many siblings.
Now, did that sister live with you?
Yeah, so I guess every divorced family is different, but my sister and we would meet our father like twice a week, but her situation was that she would live with us for a week and then she would live with her mom's side of the family for a week. And we lived close enough that it was not a big deal because they lived within the same school district, so she didn't have to worry about, like switching schools every week. That would be crazy.
Right. Yeah, that would be pretty intense. And so have you talked with your sister about this at all? Have you ever asked her what that was like when she suddenly had all of these new siblings come into her life?
Yeah, I have. And I witnessed it firsthand too. I know that one big culture shock for her, because, joining a new family is a culture shock. I guess the 2 biggest culture shocks were bedtime routines for her. She actually slept with her parents all the way until she moved in with us. So going from sleeping with your parents to being in your own bed with a new sister also in that bedroom who has her own ideas of what a bedtime routine should be was very difficult. For example, she was afraid of the dark for a long time. And my sister would be like, "It's too bright. I don't want a light on." And the other one would be like, "I'm scared. We need a light." And I think the other big difference, which I remember from even my 3-year-old self, was just sharing things. When you're the only child, you get all of the love from everyone. And then when you have siblings, suddenly, you have to share that love with several people, and it makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And did your sister ever mention if she, maybe this is too deep of a question. I'm not sure. Depends on how close you are with your sister. Did she ever say that she felt resentment about suddenly having older sisters? I imagine, like, if suddenly you're like, this is your new older sister and it's Kassy, she's probably really stoked. She's like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." But did she ever talk about how she felt?
Yeah, I think the hardest part for her was more about the switching homes every week because the rules were so different. My parents were more traditional, conservative upbringing, and her mom was much more carefree, like, be your own person very quickly kind of family. And likewise, she was the youngest in our family, but in her mom's side, her step siblings moved out fairly quickly. So she was the oldest with her two half siblings. And the dynamic, I cannot imagine it, but the dynamic of being the youngest in one family and the oldest in another family must be insane.
Yeah, but in a way, it would give you a really unique perspective to what that is like, right? Like, you mentioned that you're the oldest. I'm also the oldest, and I only know what it's like to be the oldest, but your sister, she knows what it's like to be both the oldest and the youngest. So that's a kind of cool perspective.
Yeah, exactly. I think for her, from what I could see, she felt a little bit like a person in between worlds sometimes. But I think even though it was hard, she also really loved it, because the first few years, I think one of the downsides of being an only child is that you feel lonely sometimes. And yeah, she never had a chance to be lonely after her family expanded like that.
So when you were growing up, did you have any friends who are only children? I feel like today, and I have absolutely no data to back this up, this is just my gut feeling, but I feel like today it's probably quite common to have a lot of, like, if you're a teacher in like grade 2 and you had 25 students in your class, it wouldn't surprise me if 10 of them or even more were only children. But when I was growing up, I did have one close friend who was an only child, but all of my other close friends all had siblings. What about you, where you grew up? Was that like a common thing? Did you have any only children friends?
Yeah, I was very similar to you. Most of my friends had siblings, but there was one in my neighborhood who was an only child.
Okay. And to me, my friend who was an only child growing up, unfortunately, once I grew up, I haven't really kept in contact with this friend, but my mom is friends with his mom still. So I do hear a little bit of information about him sometimes secondhand. Like moms like to brag about their kids, right? So you do hear updates. But, I think one of the things that people worry about with only children is that they'll be lonely, or maybe their social development will be slower, right? They don't have any kids to play with at home. So maybe things like you mentioned, Kassy, maybe sharing is a difficult concept to understand, things like that. But this guy has grown up to have a very successful career and a family of his own, very well adjusted. And I never got any of that from him when we were growing up either, that he wasn't like socially able to do anything. I think he was totally fine. I wouldn't have been able to pick him out as an only child unless I had known, if I could put it that way.
I think the parents of only children might work harder to socialize their kids more. So they might go to more play dates or take their kids to daycare earlier, or, something to get their kids socializing, even if it's not directly with a sibling.
So if you were an only child, it's hard for us to put ourselves in that situation, but what do you think it would be like? I could see there being a lot of pros and also a lot of cons. Some of the pros for me are like, I have a brother and a sister. My younger brother is a couple of years younger than I am, and my younger sister is 5 years younger than I was. And I'm close with both my brother and sister. Of course, they live in Canada, so I don't get to see them too often, but we're still close and we have a good relationship. I do remember fighting with them a lot, like wrestling with my brother and fighting with my sister, just like about regular, everyday kind of things. If you were an only child, you wouldn't have to do that. You would never have to like fight with your brother about who can play the Nintendo or something like that, right? You just play the Nintendo whenever you want. But at the same time, like playing the Nintendo was fun when we got to do multiplayer games. And, I got to play hockey with my brother all the time and play sports and stuff together. And if I were an only child, I wouldn't have had that opportunity to, go outside and always have somebody to play with. Those are some of the pros and cons I can think of. What about you, Kassy?
Yeah, I just think about family vacations as well. Like we went to the beach, the same beach. So we called it the beach every year growing up. And I just can't imagine if I had to, build a sandcastle by myself without my sister, or, dig for sand fleas alone. Again, I imagine that only children probably invite their friends over so much more often than we had the opportunity to. My parents were like, you got each other. There's no friends coming over here. So in some aspects, I think only children might even be more social than I was growing up, because I wasn't allowed to have as many friends over, which might be a plus. I was a little socially awkward at certain points of my life. But at the same time, yeah, I think at family gatherings, if you're surrounded by people who are a lot older than you, there might not be any cousins who are similar in your age too. It could be kind of a boring experience. While for me, I always knew I had at least one buddy similar to my age that I could hang out with.
You brought up vacations, and it just crossed my mind, like, when I was growing up, my family would take vacations like in the country. Sometimes we'd go to different cities in Canada. Sometimes we'd go to the USA, but that's not like as exciting as it sounds for most listeners. Like if you're a Korean listener right now and you're like, oh my God, going to the USA, that's like a huge international trip. But it was only like a 45-minute drive from my home growing up to go across the border. And it didn't really feel any different than Canada, other than the prices of things were a little bit different. And in the States, you could buy cherry Coke. We didn't have that in Canada. So I liked to buy a cherry Coca-Cola. But it wasn't like, this amazing international trip that you might think it is. And I think one of the reasons why my family didn't go to Europe, or we didn't go to New York City or someplace like that that's quite far away, is because that's expensive when you have a family and you have to pay for 5 airplane tickets and maybe a couple of hotel rooms and going to restaurants and stuff. You really have to be quite well off to be able to afford that, and that wasn't possible for my family. But I'm wondering if I were an only child, if that would have been possible. I think my friend who was an only child did get to travel a lot, and yeah, it might be because of that reason. Who knows? I'm thinking that just could be a benefit of having an only child. If your family has a little bit extra disposable income to spoil you with, and they're the kind of family that likes to spoil their child, it could be a pretty nice benefit of being an only child. You could reap those benefits.
That's true. I did think of one more thing that being an only child might prove difficult in a way. I have a friend who's an only child, and her mom is quite old, like much older than my parents. And one thing that she's dealing with right now is that her mom got kind of sick. Like she's okay, but she was pretty sick for a while. She had some sort of an infection. And, my friend is an only child, and she's living in Thailand here working with me, and her mom lives back in the States. And I imagine it must be so stressful being an only child, realizing that if you have an elderly parent and you live far away from them, you might be their biggest support, and you really can't be if you live so far away. I know for me, I worry about that. I don't worry too much since my parents are still young and healthy. Thank you. But I do worry living far away that someday, I won't be there for them. But my sister lives in the States, so I could always count on her to be there first, and maybe I could come later. But yeah, as an only child, you might be the one that your parents have when they become elderly.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think that's something that probably everybody who lives abroad or lives far away from home even has that worry, right? Is if there's a family emergency or something goes down, you're so far from home and it will take you a couple of days to get there. That's a really scary thought. And yeah, I don't think you're alone in that. But if you were an only child, that would compound it. That would make it even more intense, I think. And yeah, I've heard those kinds of stories before, and it always makes you think twice, right? You're like, is it worth it living abroad if that kind of thing would happen to me? But yeah, I also have siblings back home who I hope could cover for me in a worst case scenario, but let's hope for the best.
Yeah, let's hope there are none. Yes.
Yeah.
Andrew, I have one final question for you on a slightly happier note. This is a hard question. Do you think that only children have a higher imagination than ones with siblings, since they might have to entertain themselves more? Or do you think, bouncing ideas off of another person might also boost that creative element of your brain? What do you think?
That's a great question. I have no idea. I'm just trying to think. Growing up, I think some of the reasons why I would fight with my brother and sister is because they would distract me while I was trying to concentrate. I'd be trying to read a book or do some homework or something, and there'd always be somebody running around or making noise. And I'd be like, shut up. I'm trying to read my book. So I'm wondering, if you were an only child and you had that nice quiet environment all the time, if it wouldn't be more suitable for studying, for learning. Like you said, maybe you'd have to entertain yourself, so you'd have imaginary friends, or you could strengthen your creative skills, your creativity that way. I'm going to say, I think there's something to that idea. I'm not a child psychologist or an educational expert or anything like that, so I have no clue. But just based on what my past was like and thinking about it, I think you might be on to something there, Kassy. I think that might be true. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I know that I definitely played imaginary games with my siblings, but, it would be a share of ideas. So sometimes theirs, sometimes mine. And you're right, we would bicker over whose idea was better. And sometimes that would devolve into an argument and we'd just quit the process altogether. So maybe only children, maybe they're not more creative, but maybe they're more able to concentrate for longer periods of time than people that have had siblings, since they have more uninterrupted work schedules.
Maybe they're better at thinking their ideas through to completion. If you're playing with other kids and you're like, oh, let's do this, let's do that. Then some other kid's like, no, I want to do it this way. And your original idea doesn't get to come to fruition, doesn't get to become reality because you have other people chiming in and changing it. But if you were an only child and you were by yourself, you could just do things the way that you want to do it, right? I remember one of my favorite toys was Lego. And so we just had tons of Lego blocks in these big Tupperware containers, Rubbermaid containers. And when my friends would come over to play, or when I'd play with my siblings, we'd just dump the Lego out and go freestyle, go crazy, and just make all kinds of wild, creative buildings and structures and those kinds of things. But it was very collaborative. We'd talk about what we want to build and we'd be working together and building together. And sometimes you'd end up with really cool things when you're working together with other kids. And sometimes you're like, that's not what I wanted to do. This sucks. Why did you have to ruin my awesome city that I was building? I was always into city Lego. However, if you were an only child, I think it's I want to build this Lego structure exactly the way I want to do it, and nobody's going to stop me, and you could do it. So, pros and cons to both. Yeah.
I think that what we've discovered through this episode, Andrew, is that there are definitely pros and cons to being an only child. And one is not better than the other, but there are interesting perspectives that you might gain as an only child that you might not gain having siblings, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. And I think especially for this episode, Kassy, we really need to rely on the support of our listeners for giving us a wide range of opinions about this, especially if you are an only child out there. We would really like to hear from you because unfortunately, Kassy and I, we can just guess, right? We don't actually know what it's like. So we'd love to hear what your experience was like growing up and what you think the pros and cons of being an only child are. And the best place to let us know and to give us your feedback and to share your opinion is on our Discord server. So we'll put the link in the description for this episode to join our Discord. And we hope you will chime in and share with us there. We'll be waiting for your message. And with that being said, Kassy, I think we will take off for now. So thank you for this conversation. It was a fun one. Thank you everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed it as well. Take care, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
See ya.